The Republican primary divide deepens. Utility companies questioned by the state. And Indiana lags in primary and preventative health care. From the television studios at WFYI Public Media, it's Indiana Week in Review for the week ending March 27th, 2026.
Indiana Week in Review is produced by WFYI in association with Indiana Public Broadcasting Stations. Additional support is provided by Har Ritchie.
Some Indiana state senators who voted against last year's redistricting attempt are now running for re-election, and they face heated primary races. Caroline Beck reports one notable Indiana Republican is throwing his support behind some senators.
Former Governor Mitch Daniels has been vocal in his opposition to the state's mid-decade redistricting attempt. Some Republican lawmakers who voted against redistricting now face primary challengers supported by President Donald Trump. Daniels says he's lending his name power to those senators facing heated primaries. Daniels says the funding and influence from outside PACs and other national political powers should concern Hoosiers.
Are we going to let folks who have no interest in progress of Indiana or the welfare of our citizens determine who our elected officials will be based on their sense of how they hope to maintain national power?
Indiana's primary election is May 5th.
Is the redistricting divide amongst Indiana Republicans still at play? It's the first question for our Indiana Week in Review panel. Democrat Ann DeLaney. Republican Mike O'Brien. John Schwantes, host of Indiana Lawmakers, and Niki Kelly, editor-in-chief at Indiana Capital Chronicle. I'm Jill Sheridan, managing editor at WFYI. So, Mike, will Mitch Daniels be an influential voice ahead of these elections?
Well, some people, sure. And certainly with the constituency of people like me that thought mid-cycle redistricting was misguided. But those people have to show up. I thought there's some interesting developments this week. Greg Good's opponent's family endorsed Greg Good this week. So these candidates are flawed. The guy running against Travis Holdman filed, then he tried to drop out, but he missed the deadline to drop out, and now he's running again, but not really running. So there's some interesting dynamics in play when you're trying to haphazardly throw together an opposition or a protest movement party, right? Which is what this is. We'll see how it works out. I'm to the point in my career where I've been wrong about enough that I could be wrong about anything ever, anytime.
Stipulate.
So we'll see what the outcome is. But we could look back on this election year and go, what a quaint idea that we were going to go from 7 congressmen to 9 congressmen. And now we're fighting a war that the Republican base doesn't want. Gases. I filled up my tank twice in the last 2 weeks, and for the first time ever, I can't fill it up because my credit card only lets me charge $100. If I'm feeling it, I guarantee you everyone's feeling it. Yeah. We could look back on the outcome if it's just a wipeout for Republicans in Congress. But go, how funny that we thought we could go in and squeeze in 2 seats out of Indiana was going to make any difference. It's like throwing a cup of water in the ocean here. But no, I mean, it's great that Daniels and others are stepping up because that's what needs to happen for the outcome to be what some of us want it to be.
I mean, it was a busy week. We saw also President Trump come out in support of a number of candidates who he selected as potential support for primary ahead of this election, right. And we've seen a lot of names being thrown around. What is this election?
He throws names around. If we're talking about the president, I mean, he denigrates anybody that he doesn't like, or any women he doesn't like, or anybody who doesn't agree with him about everything. He's a complete megalomaniac, and this is a battle, frankly, for the soul of the Republican Party in these small districts, because it's the establishment Republicans who say, let's be conservative but not crazy, and the Trumpers who are willing to be crazy. I mean, they're willing to support him no matter what he does. He's being led around by Netanyahu now, and we're in a war. We don't know why we're in a war, because supposedly they killed off the nuclear capability last year. And, of course, he did break the treaty, tore it up, as I recall, the treaty that had that under monitor. I mean, the stuff that he does, now he's saying, or he said the other day, that we're in the war to open the Straits of Hormuz. Well, they were open before he bombed. I mean, and yet these people that he selected who are to the right of Attila the Hun are lining up only because they think that he's God. And, you know, I hope that there's enough sensible Republicans to vote in the primary to realize that that's a big mistake to elect those people.
The reason they voted no was because they heard from exactly 0 people in their district that they
wanted this. Yeah.
That they wanted this. And so if you're running on a platform of something that was universally unpopular, except with a very small group of people, who just thoughtlessly are just a yes vote.
Whatever. You want to bomb Iraq? Sure.
Where minutes earlier they would have been opposed to the same idea.
Yeah.
Niki, we also, heard early on during the redistricting that there would be a lot of money behind, and we are seeing some of that money coming in. We're hearing from some incumbent lawmakers who are saying they've never felt so attacked.
Yeah, districts. That's why.
There's a lot of radio, TV mailers out there. Several of them through some dark money nonprofits, so we don't really know where their money comes from. And, I'd love that, some of it is about redistricting, but they're bringing up votes from 10 years ago that most of the Republicans supported for like a gas tax or, something like that. And the challengers are honestly, there might be a few good ones in there, but they're not standing up for anything. Like their entire campaign is that Trump endorsed them. And so, it'll be interesting to see. I think most of them are going to be fine. I think they have long ties and deep ties in their district. And I think most voters will recognize that these are, some national groups trying to control Indiana races.
John, do you think we will, possibly hear from other Republicans, old guard Republicans here in the state?
I wouldn't be surprised to hear from other establishment Republicans or regular, normal,
sensible,
Republicans. The party that I think we were familiar with before Donald Trump ascended to the White House. But we talk about the money. The money, yes, we're seeing various groups and factions that are all out of state, which are pumping money into this race. But it's not all one-sided. The President pro tem, I don't know what the purse strings look like right now, but he's sitting on, $3 million that theoretically could be used to shore up some of the incumbents, the folks who didn't go along with the mid-cycle redistricting. So I think neither side is going to be, wringing their hands saying we need money to get our message out. And I think the point that has been made is a good one. These folks are well known, the incumbents are well known in their districts, and they seem to be pretty aggressive about trying to sample the attitudes and the sentiments of their constituents. In fact, Greg Good was chronicled, I think, on the front page of the New York Times, where he was having these hearings, which were overwhelmingly against redistricting. And I presume that the other lawmakers, they're not entering into some suicide pact. If their voters and their constituents, were calling and filling their inboxes with demands that they support redistricting, they might have voted a different way. I think they're in touch with their constituents. I think they have the loyalty to a large extent of their constituents, and I'd be surprised if the makeup post-primary day looks much different from what it is now.
Well, as a Republican, Mike, we are hearing, from even outside the state, like a lot of eyes are on what's happening with the Indiana Republican Party, and we're hearing the core message is that we want to do Indiana. We don't need national influence. Is that really where it might all end up?
Yeah, I think that's Mitch's point. And that is such a frustration. I mean, I've run a lot of campaigns, and as political society became more nationalized and more tied to the national mood instead of uniquely local things, the national money and these national groups follow that. And the problem with that is, if you're running a campaign, you turn on the TV and there's an ad running in support of your guy, and it's a message that's way off. Yeah. So they're talking about, it's just frustrating because, and that was my point all along. These guys do not care, to Mitch's point, about what is going on in Indiana. They do not care what the next legislature does, however it's made up. They care about retribution. They care about holding the line and proving that if you don't hold the line, you're going down. We're taking you down. And I think the reason so many people are looking at it is because you are looking for cracks in that, because you are trying to figure out, we're a few months away from who's next. Yeah. Like, it's not Trump, who's next? And then you look in his own congressional district, Mar-a-Lago went to the Democrats. It's a safe Republican seat, special election this week, Democrat wins.
I do think
there's just more and more examples of that.
To your point, Joe, that message you said, it is the right one, because it seems to me you don't want to argue which is more conservative, which is more Republican, one is, in God's eyes, the right way. But by saying outside influences, that message, I think, resonates even with people who perhaps are supportive of Donald Trump in other regards.
Yeah, I don't know about that. And the problem comes here. Maybe Good is more well known in his district, but I bet you that if you started polling in these districts as to who your state legislator, or who your state senator, I should say, who your state senator is.
I bet Travis Holcombe's name ID in Markle, Indiana is pretty high. Linda Rogers, who's been a very high-profile business owner in the community.
I don't know. And what they're doing is they're not saying I'm running because I'm supporting redistricting in the midterm. They're saying I'm running because I'm Donald Trump's hand-chosen person. And the question to me is, do Republicans look beyond that and look at the analysis that you're talking about, that this is outside money, this is retribution, this is about redistricting. Redistricting is yesterday's news. Right. Okay? And we may focus on that, but I don't know how much the legislators do.
There are some Republicans, I gather, who would see those spots. I'm handpicked by Donald Trump, and that's the reason they're voting for the incumbent. I mean, there is a group of Republicans who. I don't know if it's.
There's some out there.
One of them's sitting here. That makes.
Yeah. I know. See how it plays out.
Mitch Daniels. That's two. We know two.
It's time now for viewer feedback. Each week we pose an unscientific online poll question. This week's question: will Mitch Daniels' support help Indiana Republicans who voted against redistricting? Vote yes or no. Last week's question posed to viewers: should the state dedicate $1 billion to bring bioscience business to Indiana? 43% saying yes, and 57% say no. If you would like to take part in the poll, go to WFYI.org/IWIR and look for the poll. The state commission that oversees Indiana's utilities companies conducted the first phase of an investigation this week. Zach Castle has more in a public hearing with the state's 5 investor-owned electric utilities.
The state questioned the companies on what they are doing to keep costs down and how they are fielding customer concerns. AES Indiana services the Indianapolis area. Company representatives say they're taking measures to manage build costs. Infrastructure costs for new large load customers like data centers will currently be paid by the tech companies. Brandy Davis-Handy is president of AES Indiana.
If one of these large load customers were never to add, a megawatt to the grid, they are on the hook for the cost incurred for both the generation, the transmission, and the distribution that we are building out.
She says the recent announcement that BlackRock plans to buy the company will not shift new costs to existing customers.
So, Ann, do you think the utilities offered any solutions that we heard this week?
The solution, they don't even need an investigation. Former Senator Zay just has to look at the legislation the Republicans have passed for the last 22 years, allowing these rates to be the average homeowner pay more than anyone else in the Midwest. Everybody's electric rates went up this last year. We went up number 2 in the country. And it's all because of policies the Republicans have adopted for decades. So they don't need an investigation. And it's kind of hard to fault the utilities for taking advantage of, the money that the legislature's given them. I mean, it's ridiculous. They've been in control. The rates have skyrocketed. Finally, people have said enough, and now they're realizing there's a problem. Well,
IURC Chair Andy Zay did say that we will have some answers here in the short term. What might those look like, do you think, Mike?
Well, they passed House Bill 1002 this year, so they moved to this kind of performance-based rating system, right? That theoretically could lower bills. One thing we learned from the utilities is, usage does matter. Residential rates went up, what'd they say, 45%, and homeowner bills went up 33% in November and December because usage went up so much. And they didn't touch the actual rate. It was just they were just using more energy. But there's a lot of different factors here. So yeah, it's usage. Yes, it's the IURC setting rates that are appropriate, but also while also balancing out supporting the investment in the actual infrastructure that's required to be built to turn the light on. But then the Trump administration this week, we have no control over the federal government coming in and telling NIPSCO and CenterPoint they can't close their coal plants.
Right.
And so part of this is the industry saying we have cheaper ways to produce energy. And we don't decide year in and year out how to do that. We decide 40 or 50 years at a time, right? And so you go, you're not closing the coal plant. It's like, that's just going to cost us hundreds of millions of dollars a year, is what NIPSCO said this week. So there's like it's like a four-headed monster, right? Of like usage, the governors, the IURC, the federal government, and they've all got to work towards the same goal.
Yeah. They're not going to work towards the same goal. We're not going to get cheap electricity from.
It's like health insurance, right? It's like I passed a policy, so my health insurance rate went up 20% instead of 25%. And the public's not going to look at that and go, thanks.
Yeah, no.
Nikki, do you think it is, so many layers of the problem? He mentioned, the coal, NIPSCO saying that they had to continue that work.
Everyone has their own theory on what's causing it, right? Some people say, well, the fact that we're moving away from coal and going to renewables is causing it. Other people say, no, it's that our grid needs upgraded, and there's no way around that. Obviously, lawmakers have allowed them to add trackers onto everything. Every time, we're all paying more in gas, guess what? They're paying more in gas too, and they get to recover it from you because lawmakers said they could. So I think the funniest tweet I saw today or this week was someone saying, the IURC is absolutely going to get to the bottom of why the IURC approved all these rate increases.
Exactly.
John, as we start listening sessions around the state as well, I think we're going to hear from a lot of consumers who have just lost the trust.
I think that's a safe bet. There will be a lot of frustration on the part of ratepayers. But it is a very complex situation for all the reasons that have been spelled out here. And if anything, I think the message, what we're seeing here is a focus on this issue. I mean, it's not as if this came out of nowhere. People have been watching their bills increase. But this governor has made it a priority, and Andy Zay has his marching orders. And so, these kinds of hearings that are taking place, these are the first time they've done that. So I don't know if necessarily coupled with 1002, the new performance-based rate benchmarking and so forth, if altogether that has a tangible, quantifiable, totally identifiable impact or not. But what happens in the meantime is politicians can say, we're doing something. We've had these unprecedented hearings. We're listening.
Wow, it's unprecedented.
They're calling it an investigation, which is a word that, hearings.
So they're going to issue a report.
I guess it means that there's an antagonist and there's a bad guy. There's somebody wearing a black hat and somebody wearing a white hat. And I guess IURC now is going to be the sheriff that comes into Dodge and rescues everybody.
Want to see results.
Yeah.
Well, Indiana also lags behind other states in primary and preventative care, according to a new report. As Ben Thorpe reports, the study comes as a number of providers are worried that legislative changes this year could further worsen existing problems with health care access.
The report found that Indiana lags behind the nation in the number of primary care providers. Employer-sponsored health care spending on primary care is also significantly lower than the national average. Aparna Soni is a lead author on the report. She says preventative care has significant benefits.
There is so much evidence out there now. It reduces spending, it enhances value in the long run. Sometimes it doesn't provide those outcomes immediately.
Some advocates in the state worry that as lawmakers try to reduce healthcare spending through Medicaid cuts, they're making it harder for people to access primary and preventative health care, increasing long-term costs.
Niki, is Indiana ultimately making decisions that may make healthcare access worse?
Yeah, I mean, because what helps in the near term isn't always what helps in the long term. And so, lawmakers and agency officials are looking at the Medicaid costs and saying, good Lord, we can't afford this, or we're not going to be able to do anything else with our state budget. So they're trying to save money, but there are always reactions and consequences from that.
Yeah, and John, we know that, preventative and primary health care up front will save money in the long run because people are not going to
And
the
there's
ER.
a recognition on the part of many lawmakers who supported a spike in funding of public health initiatives, the first one in decades of any size, a few sessions back. Now that's been sort of whittled away, and it's maybe not as robust as, and there's not as much zeal behind the notion of prevention as there was before. But the problem is, we all know as a society that good education, good start for children, makes a better economy, better criminal justice system, keeps people out of prison. We also know that preventive health care, saves us costs in the long term. But when you have lawmakers who need, what have you done for me lately, and they're running every 2 or 4 years, if there's something they can, it's almost sexier, I think, to say, we have this disease that's already an affliction. We'll throw money at that because we can say, it's easier to score points, I think, politically than if you're looking ahead. We just, as a society, we don't look ahead 20 years.
Well, and I mean, we are consistently lagging behind Indiana in vaccination rates and some of the screenings that people are supposed to get, and we're just falling farther behind, it seems.
Because we have to be, the state has to be the provider of last resort. It has to be. And Medicaid has to provide that service. I mean, the primary care problem is a problem across the country, and it's a problem across the country because many of the primary care practices have been acquired by hospitals, and hospitals are paying the doctors so little that they don't want to do that. They don't want to practice in that area when you're making less than your nurse and you had to go through medical school and spend an awful lot of money to accomplish that. So we've got to be the backup, and instead of being the backup in this particular case where we're particularly affected by this, we're cutting Medicaid funding, and it's the exact same thing as we do with preschool. They go election to election. They don't look at what the long-term health of this country, of this state, is going to be, and that's why it is so myopic, and that's why we pay such a heavy price, both in education and in healthcare.
We have a real workforce issue too, according to the report. Just not having those people here and coming to the state and wanting to practice in rural areas as well.
That's a problem. I think that's the rural, I'm going to get the name wrong, I'm going to butcher it, rural health transformation task force, or what, these hundreds of millions of dollars that are coming are trying to focus on that. I'm on the Marion County Health and Hospital Corporation Board of Trustees, and the health department just released their community health assessment. So just to give you a really local example. The difference between the neighborhood you and I live in, Ann, and 5 miles south of us for life expectancy is 20 years. It's a 20-year difference. And so Eskenazi, which is also under the corporation, the hospital under Dr. Harris, is focused on exactly this, prevention. And because we know we see the money, and we can't trust Medicaid rates are going to stay where they're at. And that's a huge part of the population, the hospital services. So they've very much focused, the whole strategy has been around prevention, regular checkups. We need cheaper people, and this is the way to think about it. I know you can't think about it this way. The person that's healthier is cheaper when they're walking in the door. And that's how we solve the long-term problem. But to your point, Niki, the government thinks 2 years at a time. It doesn't think,
election to election.
I'm going to see this person from the time they're born to the time they die, right?
And we're going to let them live a little longer.
Well, I mean,
part of the equation.
We are talking about, a lot of people losing health insurance, and we've seen, an estimated 100,000 people that will be losing health insurance here in the state. And the report does point out that having insurance is a much better way to get people to the doctor.
There's no question about it.
It's common sense.
We've talked about this briefly before, too, but the cost to small businesses of providing that kind of insurance outside of Medicaid, obviously, but providing it is escalating so quickly that, frankly, we're going to have to go to universal health care for all, like a Medicare situation, if we're ever going to solve these problems.
And what do you think, Niki, as far as this report goes? It is trying to offer some solutions and ideas to legislators next year who will be considering ways that we can address health care access.
Yeah, I think they'll be focusing more on health care next year. They kind of avoided it in broad strokes this year. So we'll see if some of these things, can move through. Some of it's, something as simple as allowing a nurse practitioner to, cover more ground, more patients, maybe a little less training, to try to get so more appointments are available for people to get in for the preventative services. Some of them will cost money, though, and then that's where the rubber hits the road for our budget next year.
Well, that is Indiana Week in Review for this week. Our panel has been Democrat Ann DeLaney, Republican Mike O'Brien, John Schwantes, host of Indiana Lawmakers, and Niki Kelly, editor-in-chief at Indiana Capital Chronicle. You can find Indiana Week in Review's podcast and episodes at WFYI.org/IWIR or on the PBS app. I'm Jill Sheridan, managing editor at WFYI. Join us next time because a lot can happen in an Indiana week. The views expressed are solely those of the panelists.
Indiana Week in Review is produced by WFYI in association with Indiana Public Broadcasting Stations. Additional support is provided by Par Ritchie.